Is there something going on in your life that you would rather keep quiet or have swept under the rug, or that you would like to have kept a secret? So often those things that we hold so close end up becoming revealed. And then what do we do? How do we respond to that? The gospel today gives us some insights about what we should do with those things that we would like to keep in secret. They'll be revealed and proclaimed from the housetops. What do we do with this? What do we make of it? Let's talk more about it today on Gospel Minded. Hello, I'm Dr. Garrett Boyer. Welcome to Gospel Minded, an outreach of Benedictus Psychological Services. Go check out that website, benedictuspsych.com. Here on Gospel Minded, we spend a few moments each week talking about psychology, emotions, mental health, and well-being, and we reflect on how these topics are related to the Sunday Gospel reading. This is not a substitute for actually going to church or participating in counseling, therapy, spiritual direction, coaching, those sort of things. But it's so clear that things of our mind and our psychology go together with our spirituality. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Either way, please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode of Gospel Minded or anything else that comes up on this channel. So, my friends, the gospel today, we are in Matthew chapter 10, and there are some sobering words that the Lord speaks. This section is, the heading says, whom to fear. And so it starts here in verse 26. The Lord says, so have no fear of them, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, utter in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim upon the housetops. And do not fear those who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground without your Father's will. But even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are worth more than many sparrows. So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. Wow, there's a lot there to unpack. And certainly, if we were to examine this from strictly a spiritual perspective and look at this through a interpretive lens of theology and religion, there is a ton here. But as a psychologist, I think there is a lot to unpack when we look at this through that lens of psychology, mental health, and well-being. You know, I think one thing that I have observed time and time again when working with my patients is folks want to try and keep some stuff just to themselves. And a lot of times it's the not so good stuff, the dirty laundry, the unfortunate secret, the embarrassing truth, whatever it is. And it could be any number of things. Sometimes it's not even necessarily something bad, but it's just stuff that causes people stress, fear, worry, anxiety, and they don't want to let that out. You know, just thinking off the top of my head about people I've worked with before who have had to disclose to family members or loved ones sexual orientations. That's a really challenging thing for people to sit with and to wrestle with. They want to maybe sometimes keep it quiet, but in doing so, it causes a lot of tension and stress and fear. You know, in my own life, I remember many years ago, I was a seminary student and had been in the seminary for quite a long time and was gearing up towards ministry and was getting closer to ordination. And I started really having some doubts. Is this the direction that I need to go in my life? Is this what God is calling me to do? And as I was wrestling and working through that uncertainty, I remember having such tension, such stress, so much anxiety because I didn't want to tell people about it. Most especially my family, but I didn't really want to tell clergy and priests that I trusted. I didn't want to tell my friends. I just kind of wanted to keep it to myself, this sort of, well, let's wait and see. And whatever it might be, you all know what it is in your own life. There's stuff that we are doing, there's stuff that's going on, there are things that are happening that we don't want others to know about. But what does the Lord say? What is hidden will be revealed. What we would rather say quietly, that stuff is eventually going to get proclaimed from the rooftops. And so I think the question that comes to mind from a psychology perspective is this stuff that we are holding close, those cards that we are keeping close to the chest. What would happen if we were to start exposing some of that? What would happen if we were to shed a light on some of those things that we would rather keep private or keep hidden away? I think this idea of fear that the Lord is getting at in the gospel today, thinking about it from the perspective of psychology, we fear that which is not known. And I think so often in the lives of folks that I've worked with in my own life, it's this question of what's going to happen if I talk to people about this? What's going to happen if I confess this sin in confession? What's Father going to think? What happens if I tell my therapist about all this stuff that's going on? What happens if I disclose this fact or this situation to my spouse? Or if I talk to my boss about this thing that's happening? You know, whatever that stuff is, what would happen if we were to actually talk about it, shed some light on those topics? So often in our mind, we blow it up and make ourselves think that by talking about these things, it's going to be the end of the world, that relationships are automatically going to be ruptured, that opportunities will immediately become lost. You know, we get ourselves really worked up over the things that we don't know about. And that's really hard. And yes, it's true. Sometimes when we have conversations, when we do expose some of this stuff to the light, maybe there will be consequences and ramifications. But I think to sit with it so often leaves us in a place where we're not feeling that great either. And more times than not, when I've worked with folks in counseling, as we talk about some of this stuff and have those conversations about what would it look like if we were to put this out there with, again, whatever it is, we a lot of times hesitate at first, but when we can summon that courage to be brave, to be bold, to heed what the Lord says and recognize in some way, shape, or form, this is probably going to come out anyway. Boy, I tell you, more times than not, when my patients have had the courage to have those hard conversations, they come to realize, exposing this to the light, having those hard talks, it ended up being a lot better than I thought. And that fear that they had was more of a fear of that unknown. How are others going to respond to me? When in most cases, people are going to respond to that kind of stuff, whatever it is, better than we think, better than we expect. I think what gets people into trouble more often is when they don't have those hard conversations, and whatever the thing is that you're trying to keep private comes out in some other way. Boy, then we're in real damage control mode. And that's when stuff can get real tricky to try and navigate. So heed these words. Nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in darkness, utter in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim on the rooftops. I'm not saying go and go and talk about heavy stuff in your life with anybody and everybody. But I would urge you to be courageous, be brave, to have some of those hard conversations about the stuff that we would rather not have hard conversations about, and expose some of those things to the light. And let the Lord, through His grace and mercy, uh, help us to ease some of that burden of the fear, of the anxiety, of the stress. For indeed, I believe the Lord will do that for us. We're worth more than many sparrows. And again, as I've been pointing out for several weeks now, when I talk about this stuff, this is just as relevant for me in my own life as it is for you in your life and everybody, because we're all fallible human beings that experience the realities of the human condition. And so, with work and grace and prayer and discernment, the help of the Lord, let us work together to try and make the very best of our fallible, broken ways